In this tutorial, what we're going to do is look at 3 different ways that we can remove solder from a PCB when we've made mistakes or we need to take a component off. The component we're going to remove is actually going to be the 8-pin chip carrier that we've got just here. Okay, that's the thing that's going to come off, and we'll be able to judge how well you've desoldered based on how much solder is actually left on these pads when we look at the finished product. So let's look at the first way. The first way we're going to look at is by using this. This is a manual solder pump. Okay, the way that this works is that you prime the pump by pushing this button until it goes click. Then what we need to do is when we push this button, there's a small amount of vacuum that happens through here, and that in theory sucks the solder straight off the PCB. I tend to use the solder pump myself when I've got a lot of solder on a particular board that needs to come off. I then tend to use the other method that we've looked at in the past, which is using some solder wick, and I tend to use that to kind of take the finer stuff. Okay, so let's look at using this first of all. The technique goes like this: prime the pump, take your soldering iron, and you have to get the soldering iron in and get the actual solder that needs to come off melted. As soon as it's melted, you then bring the solder pump in and push the button. Now, the common place for this to go wrong for a lot of people is they let the solder go dry before they actually get the solder pump in. You can have the tip of the solder pump here and the soldering iron. Those two things can touch for maybe, I don't know, 2 or 3 seconds or something before we start to melt the plastic and make the place stink. So you do have a little bit of time on your side. You do have a little bit of time on your side to help you with this. Okay. What you can't do though is this. This is what you'll see a lot of people doing when they do it badly. They'll come in here, they'll melt the solder. There it is, that's melted. They'll then take the soldering iron away, then they'll sort of dither and then they'll come in here, put the solder pump on, it'll jump out the mouth, but that's okay, they're not put off, they're still going to get straight back into it, and then they're going to come in here and do that, and then be a bit surprised that the solder didn't come off the board. Okay, it won't, it'll never come off the board like that. You've got to do it while it's still melted. So here's me, having talked the talk, attempting to walk the walk. Now I'm bringing the soldering iron in from the sort of my right hand side, and I'm bringing the pump in from the left hand side as well, which I tend to find gives a better result. So let me try and do this one. Here it goes, solder's melted, pump comes in, pushing the button, taking it away, and you can see that sucked the solder off there really, really neatly. Let's try and do another one. So again, soldering iron comes in, pump goes over the top, pushing the button. It does have a bit of a kickback, you'll see it naturally kind of pings the board a little bit, but as long as you don't have anything flying away, that should work pretty good. So that's 2 of my solder points removed already. Let's look at another one, which is solder wick. Some people hate it, some people love it. It's one of my preferred ways of desoldering. When you pick up some solder wick, it's basically a copper sort of ribbon, okay, with lots and lots of strands of copper finely interwoven. The way that this works is you place the solder wick over the joint that you want to remove. You then put the soldering iron over the top of that and sort of rock it gently backwards and forwards, and using a capillary action, like you'd see in biology, it then sucks the solder into the wick and it allows you to take that away. What you'll normally find when you come to some solder wick is someone else has been there before you, like with this piece, and it's got a lot of solder trapped in it already. That's not going to do any more work for us, so we need to basically trim that spent wick off the end so we've just got nice copper braid. You don't need to have too much out either, about this much like I've got here, that's about 1 inch or 2 centimetres, should be fine. Also as well, a lot of people get the urge to unravel loads and start wicking in the middle of the piece of wick. Again, that's really wasteful as well. It's kind of better if we take it from the end, because that way it'll last longer. So here we go, here's me trying to use some solder wick now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going for these joints here. So solder wick goes on the top, soldering iron goes over the top of that, just gently rocking left and right. You'll see a bit of smoke coming off as the solder starts to melt, and if we're lucky, what's happening, here it comes, it's getting sucked up. It's actually sucked up solder from both those 2 pads there, because my solder wick was heating up both of them, but that's actually worked rather well. Let me just do the other one while I'm at it. Okay, I'll take that away now. So what that's done is that's lifted the solder from both those 2 pads there. Okay, so that's half the job done. So those are 2 ways that you can desolder. Just remove the wick that I've spent just there as well. Be thoughtful for the next person. The third and final way, the lazy way, probably the easiest way as well, is to use one of these. This is an electric solder pump. It kind of works a whole bunch like the manual solder pump. You've got a pump and you can prime it and one thing and another, you can do all that still. The difference is this one's got a soldering iron built into the end, so you don't have to worry about wrestling with a soldering iron and a solder pump simultaneously. To use this one, we start by priming the pump, so I push that in until it clicks. We get it up nice and vertical. I tend to use 2 hands when I'm doing it. I use one hand to sort of support the other, and I then place that over the part that needs to be desoldered, wait just a second, and then push the button. Okay, and as soon as I've done that, the solder is lifted straight off the board, and you can just keep going. Very, very fast way of doing a lot of desoldering. Okay, when wouldn't you want to use an electric solder pump? I don't know. Sometimes you do tend to find that, you know, particularly fiddly spot and only solder wick's going to do the job, but for the most part, if there's one available, I'd use the electric solder pump, because you just saw I did that in about 2 seconds flat. So in theory, what should now happen is I should now be able to get hold of that chip carrier, and I should just be able to lift that straight out of the board. And what I can see is that the side I just did with the electric solder pump, that side is now loose and flexible and wriggly, but this side hasn't given up yet. There's still something there holding that on. So I'm going to do a quick visual inspection, and what I'm left to think is I actually think there's some little bits just along here. So I'm going to come along with some more solder wick now, which I've just put down somewhere. There it is. And just try and get that last little bit of solder removed just using wick. So I'm just going to go over each one of the legs of the chip carrier like this, look, and just try and soak up any last bit of last bit of solder. And I can actually see on my solder wick it is soaking up some solder, so there must have been some left in there. Let's take a look now, see if that wants to come out. Oh, it's still not quite giving it up actually. It feels like there's a little bit left in that top corner, I can feel it. Let's get back in there again. Don't forget, this stuff gets hot. Don't touch solder wick straight after you've used it. I've been there before. Okay, let's try and get that last bit out. Okay, that's got you. The other thing I'm sort of doing as well now is I'm actually pushing down slightly on the chip carrier pins as I go over the top of each one to try and encourage them to come out. There you go, that's come out now, okay. So the finished result, if you've desoldered really well, is that you don't really want to be trying to mark your board too much. Solder wick will always leave a slight sort of residual copper trail just along your pins, okay, you'll see that. Doesn't affect the way that the circuit works, okay, so don't worry about that. The cleanest way is with the electric solder pump or the manual solder pump. So to sum up, that is 3 different ways that we can desolder using wick, manual and electric solder pumps. I'll see you in the next tutorial where we're going to talk about using the multimeter.